The first thing that hit me wasn't the size of the place, it was the silence beneath the music. That expensive kind of quiet, where every chandelier sparkled like it was told to, and even the breeze felt rehearsed. I stepped out of my rental car, the soft gravel crunching under my shoes, and just stood there for a second. The estate loomed ahead, Charleston perfection, brick columns, draped white lights, a fountain gurgling like a smug secret. I adjusted the strap of my purse, suddenly aware that my dress, simple, navy, sensible, looked wildly out of sync with the pastel parade of guests floating past me. Pale pinks, dove grays, beige shawls draped over shoulders like everyone got the same memo. Understated wealth only. I hadn't gotten that memo. I had RSVP'd yes and packed like it was a family gathering. Silly me. Lost, sweetheart? A valet asked, looking me up and down without moving from his podium. His voice was polite, his smile mechanical. No, I said, walking past him, but thanks for the warm welcome. Inside, the music was soft jazz, harmless, forgettable, and the air smelled like lavender oil and money. I passed by people I hadn't seen in years. A few gave polite nods, most looked straight through me. I spotted my sister, Isolde, across the room, radiant in ivory satin, a curated softness in her smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't see me. I found my way to the far end of the room where our side of the family had been gently sequestered. No signs, no ropes, just a spatial truth. You knew by how the chairs were clustered, how the lighting dimmed ever so slightly, how the champagne trays came by less often. They've really outdone themselves, my cousin mumbled, raising a plastic flute of sparkling cider. Can't even hear the DJ from here. I laughed lightly, but something tightened in my chest. Later, near the dessert table, I overheard two women dressed like catalog pages whispering behind me. The bride's side. They're a bit rustic, aren't they? I suppose there's charm in being traditional, one replied, and they both laughed, delicate, polished. I turned to face them. One caught my eye and blinked, her smile freezing for a moment before they drifted away. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. My silence, for now, was armor. Indira! Callista's voice, always too high, too sharp, cut through the air as she floated toward me. She was the evening's master of ceremony, per Valora's command, and wore a headset like she was broadcasting the Oscars. Glad you made it, she said, faux warmth all over her face. You look so classic. Hi, Callista, I replied, offering a smile that didn't touch my eyes. Lovely soiree. Oh, Valora's been planning it for months, she beamed, glancing around like the estate itself might be eavesdropping. We're aiming for elegance this evening, not chaos. Right. I nodded slowly. And how's that working out for you? Callista blinked, then laughed. You're funny. We should seat you somewhere fun. As I turned to walk away, something caught my eye. The front doors had just opened again, and in stepped Seraphine, my grandmother. She stood tall, her back straight, her white hair swept into its usual chignon. She wore a lace shawl I remembered from when I was 10, timeless, but old. There was no gold trim, no designer clutch, just her and that quiet kind of dignity no one teaches. Valora, the matriarch of the groom's family, glided across the room in her skin-tight slate gown, flanked by two assistants in black. She stopped in front of Seraphine, offering a tight smile. "Oh, how wonderful to see you," she said, taking her arm lightly. "There's a lovely private seating area by the garage, much quieter there. We want you to be comfortable away from all this standing." Seraphine didn't flinch. She nodded politely, as if she hadn't just been shoved out of the main hall under the pretense of kindness. She let Valora lead her away, slow and measured like she was walking into exile. My hands clenched. I caught Callista near the bar and walked straight up to her. "Why isn't Grandma being seated with family?" Callista blinked. "It's a delicate balance, Indira. These kinds of parties are optics first. There's no offense meant, just management." "Management," I repeated. She nodded, oblivious to the weight of the word. My mouth was dry, but I didn't speak. Not yet. Isolde was glowing, laughing across the room, oblivious. And maybe that was the worst part. Maybe she knew. Maybe she didn't care. I thought of every holiday Seraphine hosted, the pies she made from scratch, the prayers she whispered, the money she gave quietly when my mom's hours got cut at the library. She wasn't an accessory, she was the foundation. And now she was being stored like one of the extra wine barrels near the garage. I excused myself. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Leaving the banquet hall, I walked past the string lights, down the stone path toward the service wing. I paused outside the door, the hum of the kitchen just behind me, the laughter of people who had erased my blood just steps away. If she's not welcome in there, I whispered, hand on the knob. I'm not sure I am either. I opened the garage door. What I saw made my breath catch. She was sitting on a folding chair next to a stack of gardening tools and a coiled-up garden hose, her hands resting on her lap like she'd been summoned to wait out a storm. No music reached this far into the house, just the faint clink of champagne glasses and muffled laughter echoing down the tiled hallway. Seraphine didn't look up when I stepped inside the garage. Her eyes were fixed on a small stain on the concrete floor like it was telling her a secret no one else was worthy of hearing. I froze at the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer wrongness of it. The woman who held our family together through every unpaid bill, every broken promise, was now being staged like an afterthought. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't even decoration. She was a problem, neatly tucked away. I crouched down beside her. "They stuck you here?" She smiled faintly, that kind of smile only older women manage to wear when they've learned that dignity is the only thing no one can confiscate. "It's quieter. My bones don't like too much standing." "You shouldn't be here," I said. "They said it's for my comfort." She glanced toward the far corner of the garage where a dusty fan spun lazily against the wall. My chest burned, but I held it in. Not yet. Not here. I walked back inside, dodging waiters and photographers, until I spotted Isolde by the floral archway, mid-laugh. She turned toward me, her grin faltering just slightly when she saw my face. "Do you know where Grandma is?" I asked her flatly. She looked past me, over my shoulder, like scanning for someone more pleasant. Valora wanted her somewhere with seating. "In the garage?" I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't drop it either. "It's practical," she said, her tone clipped. "You know she doesn't do well with long events. Valora's just trying to make sure things run smoothly. This is a big night." "And I'm sure Grandma ruining the aesthetic would be catastrophic," I shot back. Isolde crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, Indira. Valora knows how these things work. You wouldn't understand. You're marrying into a family that won't even make space for the woman who raised you." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "Don't do this tonight. You'll ruin everything." I took a breath. I wanted to shout. Instead, I stepped back. "You already have." I returned to the garage with a paper cup of tea I stole from a catering tray. Seraphine thanked me quietly. We sat in silence for a moment, then a woman wandered in, dressed in a dusty rose silk dress with matching heels, and looked at me, brows raised. "Hi," she said brightly. "Do you happen to have more napkins?" I blinked. "I'm not staff." "Oh," she said, her face blanking for a beat. Then she walked away without another word. I set the tea down beside Seraphine. Valora's voice carried through the side hallway, low and pointed, as she passed by with her assistant. "Let's be careful who handles what," she said, not knowing I could hear her. "Appearance matters." Later, I noticed the family slideshow looping above the dessert table. It showed baby pictures of Isolde, beach vacations with the Prescotts, college photos, and posed portraits, but not a single image of Seraphine. Not one. I asked Callista about it as she wiped down her tablet. "Oh," she said, unfazed. "Weddings are forward-facing events, sweetie. People edit for the future." I stared at her. "But when you erase someone, you also erase who raised you." She chuckled, distracted. "Oh, come on. You're taking this too seriously. We're just curating." It wasn't just curation. It was elimination. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera. Quietly, I began to document everything. Seraphine's chair, the slideshow, Valora's head tilt when she smiled at rich donors, I didn't know what I was building yet, but I knew I couldn't let this go unseen. Later, I returned to the garage with another cup of tea and some fruit on a napkin, but the chair was empty. The door to the side yard was open. The cup I had brought earlier still sat untouched on the crate beside her seat. My heart stuttered. I looked around once, then stepped outside. "Grandma?" I called into the quiet night. No answer. The chair was empty. The folded napkins sat untouched on the armrest, the half-full cup of tea still warm, and the garage door stood wide open, letting in the hum of the distant generator and the dry scent of cut grass. My pulse kicked up again, sharp and unwelcome. I stepped out into the darkness, the stone path illuminated by the soft overhead lights lining the edge of the lawn. I scanned left and right, heart thudding like it was trying to race ahead of me. And then, there she was. Seraphine sat near the garden fountain, just past the trimmed hedges. Her silhouette was framed by the flicker of the water light, her shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't turn when I approached. She didn't need to. "I thought you left," I said, trying not to sound breathless. She smiled without looking at me. "I just needed air." "It's heavy in there. Too many people who don't remember where they came from." I sat beside her on the edge of the fountain, letting the quiet settle. There was something sacred about it, like her silence had weight, had purpose. I didn't want to break it, but it broke anyway. "You remember when Isolde lost that internship offer after she flubbed that interview?" I asked. "She called me sobbing, begged me to email my professor. I didn't even blink. I just did it." Seraphine nodded slowly. "She told me." "She told you," I repeated, "but she never told anyone else." "She said it would make her look weak," Seraphine said simply. "She was weak," I snapped, "and I helped her anyway." I didn't realize how bitter it sounded until I heard my own voice echo off the stone rim. But Seraphine didn't scold me. She just placed a hand on mine, light and warm. "You helped her because you're not the kind who counts favors," she said. "And that's exactly why it's starting to hurt." I turned toward her. "Did she ever repay you? Even once?" She looked back at the fountain. "I cashed my last CD to pay her tuition senior year. She was going to drop out. Her dad had lost work again." I blinked. "She never told me that." "She asked me not to." Seraphine's voice was calm, matter of fact. "Said she'd repay me by graduating." I let that sit for a long moment. The fountain bubbled. Somewhere behind us, champagne glasses clinked again. My breath came slow and deliberate. "Some debts aren't financial," I murmured. "They're moral. And those never get paid back with silence." We walked together back toward the house. The party had shifted by now. Dinner service had begun. But no one had looked for us. No one had noticed we'd been gone. Inside, I noticed something else. A string of family photos running the length of the hallway near the dining room, carefully printed, tastefully framed. One after another, Isolde in her cap and gown, Isolde and Mom at her first book release, Isolde with her fiancé, beaming in front of their new place, no Seraphine, not in a single frame. They had erased her. I stood there longer than I should have. People passed by, not seeing me. But I saw it all. I saw the choices behind each omission, the narrative they were rewriting. The quiet ones carry more than just their pain. They carry the legacy. And if no one speaks, it dies with them. I turned around just in time to hear the click of heels and the familiar artificial chirp of Callista's voice. "There you are," she said, her ever-fake smile plastered across her face. "So hey, tiny adjustment. Valora asked if we could move your family to the service wing for dinner. There's more space over there." I stared at her. "You mean the staff hallway?" Callista blinked, then offered a chirpy nod like she was handing me a gift bag. "You mean the staff hallway?" I asked, and Callista gave that plastic smile of hers, the kind that stuck in your teeth, then turned and floated off like she'd just offered me a mint, not an insult. She didn't even flinch. I stood there for a moment, watching the backs of well-dressed strangers pass me like I didn't exist. Then I turned around and found Seraphine again. She was sitting on a collapsible chair next to a storage rack stacked with folded table linens and silver chafing dishes, barely a sliver of light cutting through the side kitchen. They didn't push her out, they faded her out, which is worse because they still smile while doing it. "I thought maybe you'd gone home," I said softly. "I was thinking about it," she replied, not looking up. "But I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye to you." I crouched beside her. "You shouldn't be back here." She gave a dry little chuckle. "Where exactly should I be?" "I've been told I'm in the way more times tonight than I've been welcomed." That was it. I rose, walked straight out through the kitchen, and made a beeline across the floor of velvet napkins and polite applause. I spotted Isolde near the floral wall, taking selfies with Valora and some cousin from her fiancé's side whose name I never remembered. I didn't wait for her to notice me. I stepped right into the shot and said, "You let them seat Grandma next to a mop bucket." Isolde froze mid-pose. "Indira, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about that so-called service wing you and your precious Valora keep pushing my family into like we're part of the furniture." She glanced around, trying to shush me without looking like she was shushing me. "Can we not do this right here? If you're okay with Grandma being parked next to leftover catering trays, maybe you're not who I thought you were." Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you always so dramatic?" "Because you're not being dramatic enough," I snapped. "This isn't just about her. It's about how easily you let people erase where we come from." Isolde's face turned rigid. "This is about my future, my marriage, my career. Do you think I worked this hard to have it all ruined by some awkward old lady?" I stared at her. "That awkward old lady is the reason you graduated, the reason Mom stayed sane after Dad left, the reason you had somewhere to sleep when your internship fell through. You don't build a future by stepping on your past." She shook her head and walked away without another word. "You don't understand pressure," she muttered as she disappeared down the corridor. I stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched. Every fiber in me screamed to call after her, to say more, louder. But then I remembered something. I was 9. My parents were finalizing their divorce, and I didn't know what to do with all the silence in the house. One night, Seraphine held my hand as I sobbed into her shoulder on the porch. I'll never forget her voice, soft but certain. "One day, you'll have to speak when I no longer can." Back in the present, I took out my phone and stared at the blinking cursor in my notes app. My thumbs hovered. Then slowly, deliberately, I began typing. I didn't know if I'd send what I was writing, but it felt like something had to start somewhere. The ballroom was louder when I stepped back in, voices rising now not from joy but tension. I slipped by the drink table and caught sight of Aunt Astria, sipping from a stemless glass of red wine, her face pinched but present. "I saw what they did," she said quietly when she noticed me. "Then why didn't you say anything?" She looked down into her glass. "I'm tired of fighting Valora." "Well, I'm not." She looked up. The weight of 30 years of family politics sat behind her eyes, but she didn't argue. "I didn't think you had it in you," she said. "You wouldn't be the first." I stepped back, the clatter of silverware and the hum of jazz behind me. I thought about the slideshow with no Seraphine, the chairs in the garage, the hallway program without her name. I thought about Isolde's face when I called her out, how quick she was to twist guilt into blame. "My family used to be loud with love," I whispered to myself. "Now we're quiet with shame." And that's when it clicked. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need applause. I just needed truth to exist where it had been erased. I opened my contacts, found the name I hadn't texted in years, Marcus. We went to school together. He worked AV now, handled projectors and media for corporate events. I tapped out a message, got a 3-dot reply almost immediately. He texted, "What's the venue?" I wrote back. He called within seconds. "What's going on?" he asked. "I need a favor," I said. My voice was calm, flat. "I need 5 minutes of the screen during the toast." Marcus's reply was brief. "Got it. I'll have the backup input ready." That was all I needed. I stepped into a side hallway, away from the ambient jazz and the floral arrangements meant to distract from everything that had been edited out of tonight. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my camera roll. There it was. grainy footage of Seraphine being escorted to the garage, smiling politely while her dignity was boxed and labeled disruption. I added it to the folder. I didn't even trim it. Raw was better. Honest. No filters tonight. They filmed their story, I muttered under my breath. Now I'll show ours. Somewhere nearby, I spotted Callista rifling through event paperwork by the dessert station. Her brows were furrowed, lips moving silently as she muttered through a set list. I approached without hesitation. "Can I see the program?" I asked. She looked up, surprised. "What for?" "I just want to see where my grandmother's name is listed in the acknowledgments. And when she's supposed to speak." Callista hesitated, then handed me a thick, glossy printout. I flipped through. No Seraphine. Not on page 1, not in the introduction, not in the closing words. "She was supposed to give a short speech," I said. "Oh, yeah, that was cut last minute," Callista said, glancing to the side. "Valora thought it would be best to keep things streamlined." "Streamlined," I repeated. "You cut a human being to make room for monograms and mood lighting." Callista leaned in and lowered her voice. "Look, don't fight this here. It'll just look like you're being difficult." I folded the program slowly, tucking it under my arm. "I'm not being difficult. I'm being deliberate." She blinked, caught off guard, then turned away like I was a static buzz interrupting her playlist. I walked out to the patio and opened my phone again. A new notification blinked on the screen. Unknown number. I opened it. "You're being watched. Be careful who you talk to." No name, no emoji, just a warning with the flavor of threat. I stood still for a second, letting the breeze whip through the tension knotting in my neck. Then I clicked on the voice recorder and began to speak. "This isn't about revenge," I said softly. "This is about record. Because when people pretend you didn't matter, the only thing that saves you is the truth." That night, I worked alone in a corner of the venue's unused lounge. I loaded old photos of Seraphine, her holding baby Isolde, cooking at holidays, helping me with science fairs when my mom worked late shifts. I added audio from voice notes she'd left me months ago, her warm, worn voice reading excerpts from letters she never sent. Sometimes love means staying quiet, but sometimes it means refusing to be erased. I set it to a soft piano track, just enough to underscore the truth without dramatizing it. I trimmed it all into a 5-minute timeline. The file name: Truth Not Toast. By the time I zipped the USB drive, I was ready. Ready for whatever would come next, backlash and all. There's a kind of steel that settles in when you realize you're done asking to be seen. I walked calmly back through the main hall. Guests were filing into their seats for dinner, and the stage was already prepped. Marcus stood near the AV table in the corner, subtly angling his laptop. I slid the USB into his palm without a word. He nodded once. 5 minutes to go. And just like that, the line had been drawn. Marcus gave a subtle nod across the room, a signal only I would have recognized. He was already behind the AV station, calmly setting up like nothing out of the ordinary was about to unfold. The timing was tight, precise. This wasn't just about content, it was choreography. Callista, oblivious, stepped up to the mic. Her voice rang out over the room with her usual fake cheer cadence. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." She launched into her rehearsed speech about family, love, and the importance of tradition. Meanwhile, servers circled with champagne flutes on polished trays, and guests leaned into each other for selfies against the floral backdrop. I stood near the back of the room, close enough to the shadows to avoid attention, just far enough to watch every reaction unfold. Then Valora began her glide toward the stage. She was poised, of course, always the picture of composed control. Her dress was slate gray, matching her stony expression, and her hands were clasped like she was about to accept an award, not rewrite history. She raised the mic, opened her mouth, and the screen behind her flickered. There was a brief second of static, followed by soft piano. And then Seraphine's voice. "They say you should be grateful for being invited. But what if you were once the one who built the house?" The entire room stilled. On screen, images of Seraphine holding Isolde as a baby, guiding her through a baking contest, setting tables for holidays, sitting quietly behind Isolda's graduation cap. Then a shot of her at this very event, being led through the back hallway like staff. Whispers rippled through the guests. Some turned to look toward the back, where Seraphine now sat, still and dignified, watching her own life replayed on a screen she was never meant to be part of. The video didn't just show her history, it exposed the distance they'd crafted. It was quiet and piercing, the kind of truth you don't yell, you reveal. Callista moved toward the AV booth, whispering frantically, but Marcus held firm. He wasn't blinking. He knew the override was locked. Valora, standing beneath the screen, said nothing. Her expression didn't flinch, but it didn't soften either. Isolda, however, cracked. She turned to me, red creeping into her cheeks. I stepped forward. "You deleted her from your life," I said quietly. "But she was the one who saved yours." "Why do you always make everything about guilt?" she hissed. "Because guilt is what you feel when your conscience finally shows up," I said. She started to speak again, but the final voiceover from Seraphine cut through the air. "To be remembered is the kindest gift a family can offer, and to forget is the cruelest." The last image lingered. Seraphine at a family picnic, holding both our hands, mine and Isolda's. That moment when she was the center of us, the sun around which we orbited. Then the screen went black. Silence. One breath, then faint clapping. It started near the back. Aunt Astria first, then Elowin, the influencer who'd been recording the whole thing from her table. Then a few older guests, ones who had known Seraphine for decades, followed. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was quiet, reserved, but real. Valora slowly turned from the screen. Her eyes found mine like two lasers. "That was a mistake," she said, her voice low, chilled, controlled. "One you won't be able to walk back." I didn't blink. "It wasn't a mistake," I said, voice steady. "It was a mirror." Valora didn't flinch. She just turned and walked off, her posture straight, chin high. But that kind of silence isn't surrender, it's calculation. I knew better than to think the storm had passed. Callista stumbled through the rest of her toast like someone reading a wedding script during a fire drill. Her voice shook as she tried to steer the room back into control, tossing out weak lines about unity and growth, while half the guests scrolled through their phones or whispered into each other's ears. The air had changed. It wasn't just tension, it was revelation. I returned to my seat. Seraphine looked at me, eyes soft but fierce, and gently squeezed my hand under the table. The applause that followed was polite, brief, and awkward. No one stood. Minutes later, I caught sight of Valora pulling Isolda and her fiancé into a side room. They didn't glance my way, but the door shut with a kind of finality that made my spine stiffen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I swear I wasn't, but the hallway echoed just enough. "She undermined this entire evening," Valora said, her voice cold and clipped. "If she doesn't leave quietly, we're pulling the investment for the house next spring. We will not be embarrassed again." I didn't hear Isolda's reply. Maybe she didn't have one. When they emerged, Isolda spotted me. Her eyes narrowed like a reflex, like blame was easier than understanding. She marched up, voice low but charged. "Why do you always ruin everything I care about?" I looked her square in the eye. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not pretending anymore." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She blinked and turned away, fists clenched like she'd lost control of the very script she used to write. Just as I tried to breathe through the surge in my chest, Narina appeared beside me. The housekeeper of 20-plus years, the woman who had scrubbed marble floors and lit Sabbath candles in secret when the family forgot. She leaned in and whispered, "They did the same thing to your aunt." "What?" She nodded toward the kitchen. "Years ago. Told her she brought bad luck. All because she married someone they didn't approve of. They sent her away. Told her to stop showing up at holidays. She died last year. Alone." I stared at her, stunned. "They don't change," she added softly. "Because no one ever makes them." And then she walked off, tray in hand, back to the world of invisible labor. My throat tightened. I thought about Aunt Lorraine, the quiet one who used to bring jars of preserves to every family picnic, who just stopped coming one year. No one ever told me why. Valora stepped back to the mic, flawless as ever. Her voice was syrup. We are so grateful for all of you, especially those who share our values and commitment to family unity. I felt the burn under my collarbone. That was no thank you. That was a knife, dulled by civility. Seraphine leaned close and murmured, "This isn't the end." I nodded once. I know. After dessert was served and the last of the scripted tributes played, I found Aunt Astria near the drinks table. She was nursing a glass of wine like it held answers. "I thought you'd say something," I said. She didn't look up. "They bought my silence a long time ago. I'm not proud of that." "You don't have to shout," I told her. "You just have to stop disappearing when it matters." That made her blink. She looked at me with something close to sorrow. But she said nothing more. I drifted back toward the AV station where Marcus waited, half packed up. He smiled lightly. "You okay?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A new message, unknown number. "FYI, they've asked for the footage. Said it was an unauthorized broadcast. Want me to hand it over?" I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. And I paused. I didn't respond to Marcus right away. I just stared at his message. "They're planning to make you leave," and let the glow of the screen fade into black. Then I slid my phone back into my purse and walked straight through the crowd like it was air. No one tried to stop me. I passed the dessert table, the floral wall, the clusters of guests whispering into their wine glasses. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not after what had played on that screen. People saw me now, but more importantly, they saw her. Callista stood near the mic, tapping her cue card nervously. She scanned the room like a flight attendant pretending turbulence was part of the service. "We'd now like to share a short highlight reel," she announced, "a celebration of love, legacy, and the future." But the video that began was not the one Valora had approved. It opened with Seraphine, not a polished portrait or old photo, but Seraphine, speaking into the camera from the chair in my living room weeks ago. Her posture upright, her voice soft but not weak. "You can decorate your life with people who smile for photos," she said, "or you can build it with the ones who stayed when no one was watching." Gasps scattered through the room like dropped silverware. The screen cut to home videos, Seraphine wrapping birthday gifts for Isolde, fixing a hem on her graduation dress, reading bedtime stories to me in a room lit only by a thrifted lamp. No filters, no editing, just truth. Then came the footage from this night. Seraphine being led away from the main event, her chair in the garage, a server carrying food past her like she wasn't there, and all of it overlaid with that voice. I didn't want applause. I wanted presence. Valora's face didn't change. She stood perfectly still beside the stage, her mouth set in a line too straight to be real. But Isolde flinched like someone had pulled her heart through her chest. She stormed through the crowd and made a beeline for me. "You ruined the most important night of my life." I didn't move. "You ruined it the moment you forgot who helped you get here." She slapped me. It wasn't loud, but it was real. The kind of slap that echoes louder in silence. Gasps. Chairs scraping, forks dropping. And then Seraphine stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lift her chin. She just looked at Isolde like she didn't recognize her anymore. "That'll be enough," she said. Her words fell like church bells in the middle of the room. Aunt Astria crossed the room and placed a hand on my shoulder. I looked at her, surprised, but she nodded once. "You did what no one else had the guts to do," she whispered. And from the far right corner, Elowen lifted her phone and hit record. "This matters," she said, almost to herself. One by one, a few older guests began shifting their chairs closer to Seraphine. No fanfare, no announcement, just movement. Quiet rebellion. Valora turned to watch, her grip on the mic tightening. She was losing the room, and she knew it. Control slipped like sand through diamond-studded fingers. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there and breathed. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Seraphine caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small nod, like a blessing, like an answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask aloud. As I stepped away from the crowd, back toward the hallway, a voice came from behind me. "If you think this is over, you're more naive than I thought." I turned to Valora. "No," I said, "I think it's just beginning." I walked away from Valora without another word and stepped out into the courtyard, leaving the rustle of evening gowns and the clink of crystal behind me. The air out there was thick with something real, cool, heavy, and still. Under the old oak tree, Seraphine sat alone, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked like she belonged there more than any of them ever would. I joined her quietly. No words were exchanged for a while. We just sat there, the hush between us more honest than the applause I'd heard inside. Eventually, I said, "It's out now. They can't take it back." Seraphine smiled faintly, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Let them try. You gave people something they weren't supposed to see." Back inside, the printed event program was making its rounds. Someone near the dessert table pointed at the family acknowledgements. "Wait, isn't Seraphine the grandmother? Why isn't she listed?" Whispers grew. A few guests began flipping through their copies. Callista, half listening while adjusting centerpieces, rushed to the mic with that brittle tone she always used when pretending nothing was wrong. "Just a quick note, there was a tiny mix-up with the printing, our deepest apologies. We're grateful for all generations here tonight." It didn't land. "You don't accidentally erase someone," I murmured to myself. "You choose to." I wasn't the only one noticing. Back in the lounge area, Elowen had uploaded a video clip, one of Seraphine in the garage, sipping tea with her lace shawl draped across her lap. The caption read, "She raised the bride. She wasn't invited to speak." By the time I refreshed the post, it was already being reshared across local platforms. The comments came fast. "This broke my heart. Reminds me of my Nana. We did better. How do you leave out the person who gave you your last name?" The energy in the room began to change. People started looking at Isolde, not with admiration, but with confusion. Guests glanced at their phones, then back at the real faces in the room. It was like watching a curtain being pulled, slow and steady. Isolde found me just outside the bathroom corridor. Her eyes were puffy, her jaw locked. "You didn't just ruin my engagement," she hissed. "You turned me into a meme." I stayed calm. "I didn't do that. The truth did." She paced, teeth clenched. "They're pulling the down payment on the house. Valora said we embarrassed the brand." I folded my arms. "Maybe if you'd protected your grandmother half as much as you protected your optics, you wouldn't be in this mess." Her hands trembled. "Do you think any of this makes you look noble?" I stepped closer. "No, but it makes me honest." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away. Later, as I stood near the garden again, I took in the scene. The scattered chairs, the fading light, the hush that followed real consequence. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt quiet. This wasn't about making her small. It was about making sure we didn't forget who stood tall for us. That truth settled in my bones. Not guilt, not pride. Just weight. Solid and final. I had nothing more to prove to them. They could call it drama, rebellion, even betrayal. But they couldn't call it false. As I drifted back toward the oak tree, I noticed something missing. Seraphine's chair. Gone. A staff member walked past, holding a stack of napkins. I stopped him. "Excuse me, did the woman who was sitting here leave?" He nodded. "Yeah, said she had someplace more peaceful to be." I looked out past the hedges, toward the winding path that led to the parking area. All I saw was shadow and breeze, and for the first time all night, I felt like someone finally chose themselves over the performance. The lawn felt strangely hollow without her. I walked across it slowly, past tables that were now half empty, candles flickering low, conversations hushed or paused. There was still music playing somewhere, faint and lifeless. I kept walking until I reached the last place I saw her, under the old oak tree where she'd sat with such quiet grace just hours ago. The chair was still there. Her shawl was folded over the backrest, neatly, intentionally. A message in its own right. Even her absence speaks louder than their speeches. I picked up the shawl gently and held it for a moment, letting the fabric slide between my fingers. She didn't leave in anger. She left with intention, and like always, she did it without asking for applause. Back inside, the news had started spreading in waves, whispers at first, then full conversations. By the time I made it to the main hall, I could feel the shift in the room. Guests looking over shoulders, glancing at their phones. Isolde's friends whispering behind wine glasses. Someone had passed around the updated family gift list, the one that no longer included the Asheville property. Valora found me in the corridor near the kitchen. She wasn't hiding her fury. "She's ruining your sister's future over a tantrum," she said flatly, arms crossed. "No," I replied calmly. "She's reclaiming her dignity. That land was built with her silence. This is her first loud act." Valora's mouth tightened, but she didn't speak. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to spin. The silence between us was broken by a phone buzz in her hand. She checked it, lips parting slightly. A second buzz, then she turned sharply and walked away. I didn't follow. I had nothing more to say to her. A few minutes later, I passed by a group near the fireplace, where murmurs were swirling like smoke. Someone read aloud from a phone screen. Cressida Douglas announces withdrawal of sponsorship from Valora Prescott events, citing irreconcilable ethical conflict. Elowen had already reposted it, and then someone else reposted her. It wasn't going to stop. I stood still and let the words settle. "I invest in stories," Cressida's statement read, "and I don't support erasing authors." Not long after, people started making polite excuses. "We have an early flight. We're driving back tonight. We should check on the babysitter." The exodus wasn't noisy. It was calculated, professional. They weren't protesting. They were retreating. And I understood. When someone who raised generations walks away, people notice and wonder why. Eventually, I passed by the bridal suite. The door was slightly ajar. I saw Isolde sitting at the vanity, still in her gown, but it looked heavier now, like it was wearing her. Her fiancé stood at the far corner, phone in hand, face blank. They didn't look like partners. They looked like strangers who once loved each other in theory. I didn't stop. She didn't call out. This wasn't a lesson to teach her. It was a mirror she refused to look into. As I made my way back through the hallway, I noticed fewer guests, fewer smiles, fewer lies. I reached the empty seat under the oak again and picked up the shawl she left behind. Tucked beneath it was a small envelope. No name. Just the familiar handwriting that only Seraphine had. Right then, my phone buzzed. A message. "She left something else for you. Check the envelope." The envelope was tucked just beneath Seraphine's shawl. No frills, no wax seal, just her careful handwriting on cream paper, the kind she used when a thought had to be permanent. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, a single sheet and a brass key. The letter read, "You've done what I couldn't. You reminded them what mattered. This key opens more than a place. It opens freedom." I held the key like it was something holy. The kind of key you only receive when someone knows you'll protect what they never could. I didn't need to guess what it unlocked. Years ago, Seraphine told me about the cottage, her late husband's retreat, now empty, quiet, untouched for nearly a decade. I closed the envelope and slipped both it and the key into my purse. I didn't look back at the party. The walk to my car felt like something ceremonial. My heels clicked against the concrete, and each step carried the weight of closure. I paused before opening the door, gripping the key tighter in my palm, like I could absorb its message through my skin. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. Isolde. Her voice was sharp, but unsteady. "You got what you wanted." I turned to face her. I didn't want anything but for someone, anyone, to say thank you to her. She crossed her arms. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No, but it made me honest," I said. Her lips parted like she was going to argue, but she didn't. She just stood there, eyes glistening, but still too proud to let a single tear fall. Her dress no longer sparkled under the venue lights. It sagged around her shoulders, like the weight of the truth finally settled where it belonged. I didn't offer comfort. That wasn't mine to give. Instead, I walked back inside one last time. The chair Seraphine had occupied was still there, pushed slightly away from the table, as if the room itself had exhaled. I pulled her shawl from my bag and laid it over the backrest with care. Then I pulled out a pen and scrawled her name, Seraphine May Holloway, across the printed program where it should have been from the start. I placed it on the seat, letting it rest like a tribute. A woman I didn't recognize stopped nearby. She looked at the program, then at me. "She mattered," she said. "You made sure of it." I gave her a small nod and stepped away. Outside, the air had cooled, the crowd had thinned. Even the music felt like it was wrapping up early. I walked to my car with a new kind of stillness, no longer the desperate pulse of someone fighting to be heard, but the quiet center of someone who knew exactly who she was. I didn't win anything tonight. I just stopped letting them lose who we are. As I slid into the driver's seat, I caught the glint of brass beside me. The key. I held it up against the dim dashboard light, watching it catch tiny arcs of gold. Some doors you open not to enter, but to finally leave. I stood at the threshold of the cottage, the key still warm in my hand from the ride. The lake beyond the house was still, a thin veil of mist curling over the surface like it knew how to hold secrets. I turned the key slowly and pushed the door open. It smelled like lavender and dust and something else. Quiet. Not silence, but the kind of peace that hums beneath everything when no one's watching. Inside was everything she never said out loud. A patchwork quilt folded across the couch, a tin of old sewing needles, a row of glass jars filled with buttons, labeled by color, and on the side table, a small wooden box with my name etched into the lid. For her. Inside were letters, dozens, all handwritten. They weren't dramatic or grand. They were stories, moments, recipes, reflections, a thread of a woman's life sewn together by ink and time. They weren't meant for everyone. They were meant for the one who stayed. My phone buzzed. A link. No message. Just, "This should go public. You decide how." I tapped it. Marcus had saved the full video. The entire sequence of Seraphine being let out. Her seat replaced by an ice bucket, a server shrugging as if it didn't matter. It wasn't grainy this time. It was crystal clear. I stared at the screen for a moment, then I opened Elowen's platform and typed, "Not fiction family." I hit upload. By the time the sun peaked above the trees, the views had passed 50,000. By noon, a talk show was covering it with the headline, "Matriarch Erased, the real story behind the viral wedding clip." Sponsors pulled out from Valora's branding firm one by one. Statements flowed like apologies from people who had nothing to do with it, but needed to be on the right side of the story now. The house of mirrors she built cracked in real time, and then she showed up. She didn't knock. She just stood on the porch of the cottage like she was entitled to be there, even now. "You've made your point," she said. "You've humiliated us." I stepped outside. No yelling, no anger, just the kind of calm that comes when you're finally done explaining yourself. "You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." Valora blinked slowly, as if that possibility had never occurred to her. She smoothed the edge of her coat. "This isn't how families survive." "No," I said. "But it's how mine heals." She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. I walked past her, into the living room, and picked up the shawl Seraphine had left behind. I wrapped it around my shoulders, not for comfort, but for memory. When I came back to the porch, she was still there. "You're not welcome in this space," I said. "Not until you remember who built it." She left. No parting words, no performance. Just the sound of heels stepping off wood, back toward the world that no longer applauded her. Later that evening, I opened the final letter. "No matter what they say," Seraphine wrote, "you were never the echo. You were the voice." I sat down at the small desk in the corner and opened my laptop. I started a new video series, What We Don't Say at the Table. First episode, a reading from Seraphine's letters. In the closing frame, I stared into the camera and said, "Sometimes, the only way to honor family is to stop protecting the wrong ones." The screen faded to black, and one last message appeared. This is how the story ends. Or maybe, finally, how it begins. Late September in Bend has a